so excited to get to our next presenter. We are going to be chatting with Ben Morrison, Senior Solutions Architect at Trilio. Ben, thank you so much for being here with us. The platform is all yours.
Hi, Jess. Thank you. It's great to be here, and hello, and welcome to everyone out there listening in. With that, I will go ahead and get started. So as Jess said, my name is Ben Morrison. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect here at Trilio. And so at Trilio, we do backup, recovery, and migration of Kubernetes applications in the cloud-native sense. And so today, fitting with our theme and our series of best practices, we're going to go over today the 4 primary metrics that we view as being most important to boosting and enhancing really that cloud-native application resiliency. Please feel free to ask questions away in the chat as well as I continue along here, and we'll be happy to answer those at the end of the session. So today we're going to go over, first off, why data resiliency matters, what it is and why it matters. We're going to go through 4 metrics that we believe are best to boost your data resiliency. And then lastly, we're going to talk about why you need cloud-native data protection in order to enhance each of these 4 metrics. So first and foremost, when it comes to applications on Kubernetes and cloud-native applications, we have a statistic here from IDC, which has done a lot of great reports in the past many years. And so this is from their latest report, their 2022 predictions, saying that they're estimating that by 2024, it's estimated that 70% of organizations are going to be building in new production-grade applications into Kubernetes, which is up significantly from just 10% in 2022. So clearly, the Kubernetes industry is a fast-growing industry. A lot of companies are adopting Kubernetes into their infrastructure, and with that, and with new production-grade applications on those Kubernetes clusters, of course, a very important component is making sure that that data and those applications themselves are, in fact, protected in case anything were to happen to the cluster or maybe the application itself. When getting into some of the cloud infrastructure challenges that comes with Kubernetes, first off, of course, everyone is moving towards Kubernetes, and we're seeing this great growth because of how dynamic it is, how scalable it is, how easy it is to spin up new clusters and deploy workloads onto those clusters. But of course, with any change in infrastructure, we're going to see some growing pains, some challenges along the way. And so the main ones that we see outlined here would first be infrastructure resiliency. And as we continue on, you'll see how, of course, data protection can help you with that infrastructure resiliency. If any issues were to arise, how you can feel confident and sure that your applications can easily be restored onto a new infrastructure. We have application migration complexity, moving those applications from one cluster to the other, or maybe moving applications from an entirely different cloud or distribution to another cloud or distribution. It's very important to make sure that you don't have any vendor lock-in. And so you'll see a common theme here in us talking about being agnostic in the cloud sense, in distributions, being storage agnostic, to make sure that you don't have any sort of lock-in when it comes to that migration piece of your applications. Governance and compliance, of course, is always an important topic, especially when moving to new infrastructures. You have to make sure that you are in compliance, whether that's from a government entity or an agency, or maybe it's even just an internal compliance that you have at your organization. So we have policies, essentially, to allow you to control, automate the control of your backups in terms of the data that you are protecting and keeping. For example, maybe you have a compliance if you're in the financial industry where you cannot hold on to consumer data for so long of a time. If that's the case, you can use policies with Trilio and with your backups, that is, to make sure that those backups and that data get cleaned up after that given amount of time, so you can feel confident that you're not going to be out of compliance. When it comes to SLAs, of course, we have to make sure that we are meeting our SLAs for our customers. And the biggest one that would be on the topic for SLAs, especially for this series and our talk today, would be RTO. And so we're going to talk a lot about RTO and how to make sure you minimize it and how to use a cloud-native application protection tool like Trilio to minimize that RTO. And then lastly, I heard the end of the River presentation talking a bit about ransomware, and of course we're also going to be talking about ransomware because it's a very important topic today. And so we'll talk about how Trilio and how these cloud-native protection tools can help you feel confident in that your backups are secure, that they're encrypted or they're immutable. And so if something does happen, you can feel confident in restoring that backup and knowing that has not been touched by a malicious actor. Now, getting into more traditional approaches of data protection, these are the three main outlines in terms of what data protection is now and how it used to be as well. The first common theme we see with some organizations is trying to do storage snapshots, which would be provided by the storage vendor themselves, and then building a backup and recovery solution around those snapshots themselves. This is a system that can work for some organizations, but it can get very, very costly. It can be very time consuming, require a lot of hours from your employees and workers to be able to build out these solutions. And then you also have the fact of when you scale, if you can scale correctly or if you can be distribution agnostic or storage agnostic. That's the biggest piece, especially with these storage provided snapshots, is unfortunately usually if they're associated with one storage provider, you only of course have access to them with that storage provider. So you don't have the flexibility of being able to move storage providers if you need to. For the second one here, legacy data protection and technology, this would be more along the VM-wide backup of an application itself or of a cluster itself, so backing up the entire VMs or entire nodes instead of backing up at that application level. Again, this works for some organizations, but I encourage you to look into some of the details if you're one that uses legacy data protection. Normally, it requires an agent on your clusters. Normally, it also takes up a lot more resources than cloud-native application tools, and this is because these cloud-native tools are working with the Kubernetes infrastructure. They're working with that containerization orchestration to get the most out of your Kubernetes infrastructure itself. If you're using Kubernetes, might as well use it, right, when it comes to that data protection tools. And then lastly, open source backup and recovery tools that are out there as well. Again, a great place to start when it comes to your backup and recovery of cloud-native applications, but normally these can have some issues scaling. There can be a lot of manual work around them to get them to work properly, and there's also normally no UI and no service as well, or customer support as well to help if any issues which arise with those backups. So now that we've talked a bit about how traditionally organizations have gone about backup and recovery, we can now move into our 4 different metrics. So first of all, as I mentioned, we'll talk about recovery time objective. I'm sure many people on the call know what RTO is or have already heard it today, I'm sure. And so the important piece here is making sure that you can hit that RTO and even minimizing. If you have the ability and technology to minimize your actual RTO, that's what we want to enable you to be able to do. With minimizing your RTO, getting a faster RTO, you're going to have a lot less downtime. You'll have a limited downtime to ensure the success of your customers themselves and give them the best possible experience. Of course, one bad experience when it comes to downtime with customers, unfortunately, can result to a good amount of attrition. And so it's very, very important to make sure that your RTO is as fast as possible to make sure that your customers don't experience any of that severe downtime, to make sure that they have the best experience possible. Your reputation is also very much important when it comes to RTO, even for those who are not yet your customers. We all have seen the articles and the headlines of when some major organization has a large outage for an extended period of time. Everyone hears about it, and it hurts their reputation, and it can hurt potential new customers coming in. And so it's very important to make sure to have a fast RTO for your reputation as well. And then lastly, I think this ties into the first 2 pieces I said here, but your revenue, of course, it always gets down to the bottom line. And so with having minimal downtime and faster RTO, you're automatically going to be increasing that revenue. Metric number 2 that we have is migration speed. So it's very, very important to have that good migration speed. As I mentioned before, if you are moving across different clouds or across different distributions, especially in the Kubernetes world today, it's in microservices, it's very important to stay agile and flexible if you want to end up changing a cloud provider or a Kubernetes distribution, for example. And ultimately then, especially if you're someone working in a multi-cloud environment, and that's the way you want to build out your infrastructure, which I think is a great path to take, it also helps you ultimately save money and improve your TCO, having an easy tool to automatically migrate applications from one cluster to another. And again, with traditional methods, normally some of the technology is a little more outdated, takes a little more time and resources, can have a little vendor lock-in, and especially with those agents themselves, sometimes can cause a bit of security risk as well. So again, I encourage you to look into those details if you're someone using a traditional backup and recovery method. So again, with the migrating applications, reducing downtime, which we mentioned, meeting those SLAs as well, being able to upgrade your environment is a big one. If you want to move to one version to another and want to make sure that your applications are going to be safe and secure when you do so. Oh, sorry, we went ahead there. Then you want to make sure that you can back up and restore your applications across those upgraded environments. Avoiding vendor lock-in, as I mentioned, and then also that increased security by being completely cloud native and using the encryption in transit that Kubernetes has, as well as encryption at rest, which Trilio provides. Metric number 3, we have disaster recovery speed. So this gets into more of the time it takes for you to execute that disaster recovery plan itself. So being a part, think of this as inside of the RTO piece. Your RTO is your total recovery time objective, and that disaster recovery speed is a part of that RTO that you have to make sure is as quick as possible. In terms of outages, the number one cause of outages is cybersecurity events or cybersecurity attacks, especially pertaining towards ransomware. The average downtime, based on some studies we found, is about 22 days for a ransomware attack, which is quite significant. And the average cost of downtime is over $5,000 per minute. So if you do some of the math on that, you could easily catch yourself spending quite a bit of money to recover from a ransomware attack if you don't already have a disaster recovery plan set into place. For that disaster recovery plan itself and how you make sure you can recover your entire entire site as quickly as possible, we have a few different components that we'd like to talk about here. First off, this is not available today, but is expected to be released in Q3 of 2022 at the latest. So there's a few more quarters here. And that would be continuous backup and restore. We're actually also going to be showing a preview of this at KubeCon in Europe next week as well, if anyone is tuning in there. And this essentially is a solution that is an add-on to Trilio Vault for Kubernetes, our solution as it stands, and it allows you to back up an application, and as you do so, it's continuously restored into a repository cluster, into a backup cluster, so that you have that application restored about 99% at all times. So when the day comes that you do have to switch over to your failover cluster, you can have confidence and know that your application has automatically been restored there about 99% so. When you hit that execute button, you switch over and have the remainder of your application restored and can start using your failover cluster as soon as possible. Quick-driven DR plans are also very important to us. We have a disaster recovery planning tool that allows you to build out a plan in terms of an immediate one-click recovery. This allows you to essentially tune into the target itself, which would be S3 compatible storage, Azure Blob, or NFS storage, where your backups are actually stored. And from here, you can pull in those backups and restore them into any cluster that you have Trilio running on. So you don't even need access to the source cluster, the primary cluster, when it comes to this click-driven DR plan. If theoretically that entire primary cluster went down and on your backup cluster you had Trilio installed, you could hit this one click to then bring over your application into that new cluster. When it comes to the agnostic piece, of course, we talked about this before, but storage agnostic, cloud agnostic, and Kubernetes distribution agnostic, these are all qualities that Trilio has. In terms of storage, the only requirement that we have is a CSI driver with snapshotting functionality. Besides that, any cloud, and we integrate directly with the upstream Kubernetes API. And so because we integrate directly with upstream Kubernetes, we're therefore then compatible with any CNCF certified distribution. And then lastly, with Trilio, you can have a UI interface that has multi-tenancy. We are agentless, so we only spin up and do our job when we need to, and then Trilio spins back down when it is not being used, so it doesn't take up any additional resources. And then self-service as well. Multi-tenancy and self-service kind of going hand in hand there. You can have multiple users managing the backups of their application as they wish, and of course you can implement RBAC controls for roles and permissions that integrate directly with your Kubernetes cluster role bindings or cluster roles. So all you have to do is add in a few verbs and resources into those cluster roles, and Trilio will automatically align those roles with the correct users in that multi-tenancy. And number 4, finally, is of course the cost. It always gets down to the bottom line, right? And so we already saw this 5,000 per minute piece. We also have some more stats here when it comes to 91% of organizations reporting an hour of downtime resulted in $300K of cost. This is outside of ransomware itself. Why this statistic is different, this would just be general downtime. And then of course that ransomware piece as well. The average cost in terms of the ransom ask is what it's clarifying here, being a little over $300K. And so again, very important to make sure that you can have that quick RTO to ultimately increase your ROI is what it gets down to. And so that quick recovery is going to allow you to do so. Having that easier user interface allows less individuals, less in terms of less work hours, less hours having to maintain your backups themselves because they're automated, and you'll be able to have individual self-service for controlling those backups. And then of course that full application coverage, the metadata and the data itself all in one solution, you're able to back up with Trilio. I know some people only want to focus on the data because they can get their metadata from repositories like GitOps and GitHub. However, at the end of the day, if you restore metadata and data separately, you still have to stitch them together and make sure manually they are talking to each other as they should once they're up in that cluster. Whereas with a solution like Trilio, we back up the data and metadata, so there's no extra step in there. Once the application is restored, it's up and running just as it was before. And then lastly, that built-in ransomware protection. I know we didn't get too much into the details, but essentially Trilio has a lot of enhancements and capabilities to make sure that if you choose to, you can you can encrypt your backups and you can make your backups immutable. So even if a malicious actor got into your system, let's say, and altered your data and demanded a ransom based on your application, the next step they're probably going to take is probably looking for your backups. So even if they got access into your S3 target, for example, you can still have confidence that your Trilio backups are secured because you can have your Trilio backups encrypted and immutable at the backup level. So taking additional backups is, of course, always a recommendation we have. So if a malicious actor got into one backup, there would be another one with a different encryption that they could not get into. So here's just a summary of everything I talked about regarding Trilio. A lot of the same components that you saw here. Of course, also we have the hybrid cloud infrastructure, backing up containers, backing up in the public cloud, and then virtualization and K8 coverage as well. Here also is some of the main distributions and partnerships that we have that you can see below. But I will note here again that we are Kubernetes distribution agnostic and storage agnostic. So even if you see a storage or distribution that's not provided here, don't worry. I'm sure that you would still be compatible, and you can absolutely talk to a solutions architect such as myself and find out for sure if Trilio would be a good fit for you. And with that, I'll go ahead and move to the Q&A.
That's awesome. Thank you. What an awesome presentation. And luckily, we don't have to wrap it up there because Ben, you're going to stick around and help us dig into some questions, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm just going to very quickly, while we are answering these questions, and then I know we've got some resources, and I'll come back to those in just a moment. But we do want to find out from you all what further information would you like to get from Trilio. So please do head into that poll right now. Make sure to click, and then the Trilio team can follow up with you. Okay, I want to jump into some of the questions here. First and foremost, because I think this is a good place to start. You mentioned 4 key metrics, and we have one of our audience members wondering which one do you think is the most important?
Sure, I think that's a great question. So I would definitely say RTO, the first metric, is the most important. If you notice from me talking through the presentation, every other metric, cost, disaster recovery, migration, in some sort of way, they do tie back to that RTO ultimately. And the RTO is going to be something that affects your SLAs and affects ultimately the cost of any incidents that might occur. So I definitely think that RTO would be the #1 metric to take a look at and see how you can improve with some sort of cloud native backup recovery tool.
That's awesome. And actually, this will transition nicely. Bob is asking about, we're learning a lot about these disaster recovery options, and some of them are, it's hard to kind of know what's going to be right for you. So wondering first if you can tell us a little bit about what you kind of think the key uniques with Trilio are, but then also if you have a resource that you know of that offers any good kind of, he's looking for a compare and contrast option as well. But yeah, where would you kind of, what's something cool and unique about Trilio?
Absolutely. So I would say the big thing is that because we are cloud native, we're really utilizing Kubernetes itself, and that gets at the security level and also the performance level. So when comparing us to other traditional solutions out there, I think that's the #1 thing to look into is how much you use Kubernetes, and if you have especially stateful applications on your Kubernetes cluster, I think a cloud native tool like Trilio is definitely something you should be looking into. You'll find better performance and better security first off. Secondly, other differentiators and key things with Trilio, I would say, is that migration piece. We very easily allow you to essentially bring in all of your different clusters in terms of managing their backups into one pane of glass. And in that one pane of glass, you can go to cluster 1, do a backup, and then go to cluster 2 and restore that backup from cluster 1 into cluster 2, all within about 10 minutes or so. And so you can easily switch between those different clusters very easily. And then so I guess I have 3 points on that one. So that's #1. The second one I would say is ransomware capabilities, some of the encryption and immutability I talked about. I'm happy to provide more information there. I know if you visit Trilio's website, you can find more information on ransomware, and there's also some YouTube videos we have on our channel, our Trilio channel, that talks more about ransomware as well. And then the third piece I would say is the QCOW2 file format that we back up our backups into, or that we use for our backups. And so QCOW2 is important for the backing up of that data because it is a non-proprietary Linux industry standard. So at the end of the day, there is some other solutions out there that might have proprietary file formats where you can only interact with that backup file on your target using that exact tool. But with Trilio, you can use third-party tools like maybe a malware scanner or something or maybe a dedupe solution. Not that you would need one with Trilio, but maybe you might want to have one anyways. You can use those different solutions on your QCOW2 files, and you'll always have access to those QCOW2 files. For even if at one point you decide to change your mind and move away from Trilio, you'll still always have those QCOW2 files.
Awesome. Okay, I'm actually going to throw up the slide that you have here with some follow-up options and ways people can get a little bit more information. Honestly, I wish we could keep going with some questions here, Ben, because there's some great ones, but we are going to have to wrap it up there. So I'm wondering if, just to kind of bring it to a close, you can let people know if they want to get a little bit more information about Trilio, what are their next steps?
Absolutely. So I would say go ahead and scan either one of these QR codes, schedule a demo, or request an ebook. We have a lot of different ebooks out there, and so you can get a lot of information that way, and also by visiting our website, which is trilio.io. And I do see we have a good amount of questions left here. I apologize for talking a little too much, but we can get a hold of these questions and try to follow up with some people to answer some of these as well, because there are some great questions.
I think there was a lot of really great information, Ben, that was important to cover. So yeah, and to everyone out there, please do keep those questions coming in. We will make sure that Ben and the Trilio team get them. So you'll either hear back during the event over live chat, or they'll follow up with you after the fact. And Ben, you've got some QR codes and opportunities to follow up right here. So lots of ways to get in touch.
Perfect. Thank you, Jess.